Welcome to You Belong in the C-Suite podcast. You are ambitious in life and in your career, but something is missing. You want to bring more of your passion to what you do. Because let's be honest, you pour a ton into your work, and it needs to mean more. I'm your host, Laura Eigel. I'm a mom, wife, PhD, coach, advocate, introvert, and indoor rowing fanatic. I'm passionate about living a life that's in line with my values. We'll give you the actionable tips and tools you need to lead with your values, make a difference, and have career success. The world needs more diversity and authenticity in the top jobs at organizations. Your leadership belongs there. You belong in the C-Suite. What gets you up in the morning? What drives your decisions? What do you stand for? No idea, not even sure where to start? I use my values to guide my life and career. It's the basis of how I've built boundaries for myself and stuck to them. Are you ready to dig into what matters to you? Go to thecatchgroup.com to download your free values worksheet. That's thecatchgroup.com to download your free values worksheet to get to your core values and take action on what matters most. Welcome to this week's episode of the You Belong in the C-Suite podcast. Today, we are in the last episode of our podcast series exploring each section of the Values First framework. The steps of the Values First framework spell out the word values. So we started with the V, which stands for Values First, where we clarified your core values. Next, we went to the A, which stands for audit time. Intentionally checking in on your values more often. Then we covered the L, which stands for life boundaries, how building your boundaries is an act of care for your values by prioritizing them. Then we talked about the U, uplifting others, and how to build a culture that supports those. And last week, we talked about the E, experiencing conflict, which we dove into internal and external conflicts and how to use your values to navigate through it all. This week, we are rounding out the podcast series with maybe the most important step, the S, sustaining values. So how do you ensure that you keep an intentional and consistent practice of living and leading with your values? This is one of those fun learnings, like in the movie The Karate Kid. Ralph Macchio's character wanted to learn karate from Mr. Miyagi. But all he felt like he did was paint fences and wax cars and sand wooden decks. The spoiler alert here is that he was learning karate the whole time. He had already been doing the intentional steps and building the muscle he needed while he was doing those tasks. And I built the Values First framework in the same way. Well, I wasn't as sneaky as Mr. Miyagi, but the intentional steps and the consistency of the sections of the Values First framework were built to sustain you over time. So you've already been doing it. You've been doing it more than you realize. And in this section of the framework, I'm just asking that you keep doing it. You know how. You've learned all the moves. You have all the tools. And those tools will meet you where you are over time. You'll evolve over time. And I've also built the Values First framework to evolve with you. No matter what your level of consistency with it, you can always dip back into this framework to meet you where you are. Let's listen to this clip from the Sustaining Values section of the Values First audiobook.
Evolution through values. I'd always say, I'm not an entrepreneur. Heck, I didn't even like selling Girl Scout cookies growing up. I remember going door to door with my mom and sister. Door to door. It gives me anxiety just thinking about it. Waiting for someone to answer the door, giving my spiel about Troop 1910 and asking, would you like to buy Girl Scout cookies to support us in our leadership? I was competitive, but not so competitive that it outweighed my true introverted self. We would go to the houses of my parents' friends and our neighbors on our street. It was nerve-wracking and anxiety-producing. I hated every minute of it. The story I've always told myself was that I wasn't entrepreneurial. I've stated that to other humans before, that I'd never have my own business. That's not me. I'm not a salesperson. I hate networking. Gouge my eye out with a spork before I'd sign up for that stuff. It's funny, the things we tell ourselves, and how those things usually come true. I'm not a this, I'm not a that, and then you never are. Self-fulfilling prophecy at its finest. On my values vision board, I put images and words associated with my values, a few quotes, and some pictures of family representing my values. While down a rabbit hole on Pinterest one day, I felt drawn to the quote, "It's not who you are that holds you back, but who you think you're not." I'm not an entrepreneur. I'm not a risk taker. I'm not a salesperson. During the search for my next career move, these thoughts held me back because I wasn't entertaining starting my own business as an option. Not at first. As I dissected what I loved to do, coaching came up as something that I knew that I've always loved. You know those days at work when you love your job? That's never been an everyday feeling for me. Generally, I've had moderately high job satisfaction because I've been learning and growing my career. But the days that I got to coach someone one-on-one, especially in long-term coaching engagements, have always been my favorite days. I remember being excited when I found out we were going to have an internal certification for coaching. I got certified the next year and dug right in. It brought me so much joy. I got to use data to bring insights to people to improve their performance or impact. We used assessments and qualitative interviews to get data on leaders and how they were being perceived. What were their strengths? What could they do better to make a bigger impact? What business challenges were they facing? Bringing all that data together with their personality picture to give them themes and insights was challenging, and each coaching assignment was different. I was learning a ton. The first coaching experience I had was for a leader who had worked for the organization for over 20 years. She was an executive in finance. I walked her through her data and asked her questions. She made connections and resonated with some of the feedback. She was truly engaged, and I got to understand more about the business. I brought something to the table that was of interest to her, and I got to know her. She thanked me for the time, and I left thinking, this was a fun day at work. I could do just this, I thought, just coaching. Well, of course my job wasn't ever just that. I was lucky to have that as part of my job in some capacity, and multiple roles over my career. Sometimes I would work with executives for multiple months or a year. Sometimes I would conduct one-time coaching sessions for leaders going through a leadership development program. I was growing myself as a coach, but also supporting the development of another person in their career. At a career transition, I thought about what I liked to do and asked myself, how can I do more of that thing that I like to do? How can I do more coaching? The first thing that came into my mind was to have my own coaching consultancy. And the second thing that came into my mind was, I'm not an entrepreneur, too risky. I would have to find clients. I'm not a salesperson. I hate selling. If I thought I couldn't be a coach, then I would never be a coach. What was holding me back was thinking about the things I was not. During this time period, I tried to let go of this limiting belief. I started thinking of it as an actual possibility. What would it mean to build a business? What would life look like? I started planning for it at the same time as I was looking for jobs. While I was interviewing, I was also building out a plan for my own company. It was liberating. I knew more than I thought I did. My experience would be valuable to others. It was not if, but when I would start my own coaching practice. In the midst of the pandemic, in my mid-career, leading my team through change, I felt a tugging. At first, it was a slight tap, like a nudge. Work seemed harder. Getting through each day felt more exhausting. We were in the middle of a pandemic. The kids were still in virtual school, and we were still home most of the time. I'm exhausted by this new normal, I thought. On my walks, I was being drawn towards listening more to entrepreneurial podcasts and less to my beloved true crime podcasts. It was interesting to hear about how others were scaling online businesses, about email list building, and building a brand. The nudge became more frequent. The exhaustion of the everyday compounded for me, like it did for everyone during this time. I did my best to separate that feeling from my work self. You know, the self that shows up at work even when you are exhausted, mad, frustrated, etc. But I'm a horrible poker player. I wear my heart and my emotions on my face. My team knew I wasn't myself, and I tried to be as open as possible without putting more burden on them. I was exhausted and rationalized that the exhaustion was okay and that it would get better. I kept going like this for months, with the nudges showing up through journaling, something I had picked up as part of my pandemic ritual. I'd find myself writing more and more about what could be and how I wanted to impact the world. I was becoming more centered in journaling, connecting myself back to my values. Was it that I was exhausted because of everything, or was it that and something else? What did I feel connected to? What did I not feel connected to? Until one day, the nudge became a push. I asked my husband, just because I can do a job, should I do a job? I already knew the answer to this question. He did too, and he asked supportively, what do you want to do? Coach women to get into bigger jobs and make an impact? The answer fell out of my mouth as quickly and as matter-of-factly as if someone asked me what time it was. Then let's figure out how you can do that, said Brian without skipping a beat. I knew that I'd wanted to go into this direction eventually. Eventually, after I'd accomplished everything I wanted in this job or that job, for this organization or for that organization. But I didn't want to leave my team. I didn't want to leave a great organization where there was so much potential for me to make an impact. In his book, The Surprising Power of Not Knowing What to Do, Jay Cohn, PhD, describes that in self-reflection, we need to be aware of our own frames of reference, assumptions, and counterproductive assumptions. He goes on to describe competing commitments. I felt like I had competing commitments. A commitment to my team and organization, another commitment to myself and my values. In my exhaustion, I realized that I was trying to live two competing truths. The first truth was to be in a job I mostly loved with an amazing team. The second was building a business that aligned with my values of growth, development, and advocacy to help more women get into top jobs and lead as their authentic selves. I couldn't do both at the same time. That wouldn't be fair to the organization I worked for, my team, my family, or me. I had to give up one of those things. The push towards my values was more. It was bigger. I needed to make a decision. Wrong. I needed to make a plan to go along with the decision that I'd already made. I needed to run towards my values. I needed to leave my job and start coaching women. The push turned into a leap. I left my C-suite job in the middle of a pandemic. I transitioned to building a coaching firm. Within 2 months of leaving my job, I'd launched the company, The Catch Group, and my podcast called You Belong in the C-Suite. The anxiety-ridden girl that hated selling Girl Scout cookies was now a founder of a company. The nervous grad student with a white Banana Republic jacket at a job fair was now getting other women into top jobs. The introverted woman, who didn't give her opinion at the boardroom table, was now a podcast host, bringing her voice into the world. To be the leader that I needed to be for myself and others, I needed to continue to show up through my values. I needed a plan for sustainability. So do you.
So you need a plan for sustainability. So how will you sustain your values over time? Well, I'll tell you, you'll make a plan. Don't have a plan yet? Well, I am so glad that I can be of help here. I want you to go to your Values First workbook, where we have built out a suggested plan for you, and we've even left space for you to customize it. Things that you can do annually or quarterly to check in with your values, or to check in with the people that can hold you accountable. So if you haven't already, go to thecatchgroup.com/valuesfirst to grab your free workbook. Your plan does not have to be elaborate. Actually, it shouldn't. It should include some intentional reflection every quarter so you can stay attuned to how your values are showing up and how you lead and live. Having those intentional reflections will allow you to celebrate what's working, which is something we all need to do more of, celebrating. And it also allows you to recalibrate what's not working. I want you to set aside time to intentionally reflect on what you need to celebrate or recalibrate. And your action plan will help you do that. I'd also say to bring a few others along with you. Remember, this podcast series was inspired by work I'm doing with a company working with their employee resource group in a book club. Each month they're bringing people together virtually to talk about a different section of the Values First framework. You can download the book club discussion guide that goes right along with this book at thecatchgroup.com. So you can also bring others with you. How might you do the same on a big or a small scale? You can utilize this podcast series as another resource for people who may not have a ton of time to read, but can listen and work along in the workbook exercises instead. So how will you bring others along in your journey? Maybe that can even be a part of your action plan. Also, I love hearing about how you're bringing people along. I love getting invites to virtual discussions of content from the Values First book. So please feel free to shoot me a note at hello@thecatchgroup.com. And if I'm available, I'd love to attend your book conversations. If this content resonates with you and your organization, you can also feel free to send along my information if you need a speaker for an upcoming meeting or a facilitator for a workshop. Whether this was your first time hearing about the Values First framework, or whether you are a seasoned Values First leader, I know you've gotten some insights and new actions from following this content and taking intentional time to reflect on your values throughout this podcast series. I'm excited for you to continue to grow and evolve, and I hope that you bring others along on your values journey of self-discovery. Remember, your leadership belongs here. You belong in the C-suite. I want to thank you so much for listening to the You Belong in the C-Suite podcast. If you are enjoying this content, please remember to rate and review on Apple Podcasts. By leaving a review, you are helping others find this content. We will be featuring 5-star reviews on air in upcoming episodes. Editing and support for the podcast is done by S&E Podcast Management. To get more tips and tools to help you live a life guided by your values, go to thecatchgroup.com. Keep your boundaries and take care.